All right, hello everybody. This is Matt Vandenbeld here, or VCloud Matt as I'm known on Twitter, and we have a good week this week for you on the Twitch chat. I hope that if you guys are in the Twitch chat, you can participate at any time to ask us any kind of questions that you guys want some more clarification on, and we'll give you the best answers that we can. We have a great team assembled that's available here online. We have a special week this week where we're going to go over VPN configuration. So we're going to just kind of walk through some of it because some of it has been pre-created already, and we'll actually go through a setup of some of the VPN options. We'll go through HLM and demo what we can there, and at the end actually do a migration from our on-prem data center, which we have a physical lab in Wenatchee that will migrate to our AWS, our VMC on AWS instance. So I want to introduce my esteemed colleague, Michael Kolos, who's going to be running a lot of the demo today. Michael, if you can say hi to the folks at home.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for inviting me on.
So his Twitter account is at the bottom there now too. The classic Technica. I'm sure there's a story behind that. If you want to divulge that, or
Well, Twitter has a lot of users, and there aren't a lot of names that are available, so you take what you can get sometimes.
okay, well, I'm surprised that was around. Well, I guess I'm not surprised it's around. Anywho, we also have quite a few other people on or we have an internal Zoom chat going here. Is kind of what you're looking at, and we have some members from our support team and some of our other architects. So we have quite a good audience panel here together. So Michael, did you want to kind of just start us off right away and kind of go over some of our VPN configuration here?
Sure thing. So I've got us logged back into our VMware Cloud on AWS portal, and this is where we would come in and we see our SDDC. So everything that we're going to be looking at is on the network page, and in fact, that's pretty much where all the configuration is. So we're going to click into that tab and let it load. And we'll do a brief overview of what's on this page so that we know how to navigate, and then we can take a deeper look into the VPN setup. So the page starts off with a sort of graphical overview of what the components are in the SDDC and what they're connected to. So the first box is our management gateway at the top. It gives you the public IP and the networks that have been configured. In this case, you're going to see that the appliance subnet and the infrastructure subnet is actually different. That's because we've got a direct connect configured in this SDDC. If you don't have that, you'll find that both these networks are the same, and this is actually the network that you configure, which if you look at the video from last week, you'll see this is what we set up as the management network when we created the SDDC. Second part down here is our compute gateway. This is the gateway that protects all of our workload VMs. Anything that we want to run in our SDDC sits behind this compute gateway, which handles firewalling, routing, and connectivity for our workload VMs. And we can see that both gateways have access to the internet, protected by a firewall. And then the compute gateway has access to our linked Amazon VPC. And in addition, it can have access to our on-premises environment through IPsec VPN. And that's exactly where we're going to go take a look now. So you can see that it summarizes some firewall rules and VPN connections that have been configured. We see some colored dots showing us that looks like something's up and something's not. So let's go take a look. So we're going to scroll down, and the screen below gives us the configuration options and details that correspond with the graphical representation above. So we got first our management gateway and then our compute gateway. We're going to go to the management gateway and look at our IPsec VPN. And to demonstrate how a VPN connection is configured, we're going to set up a VPN between the two gateways, which is something that you can do. You don't need to, but it's just gives you an additional connectivity option, that there are certain times that you'll want to have VMs in your environment reach your vCenter, for example. So now I've gone and set this up already on both sides, and I've just turned this one down so you can see that it's not up, because we're going to take a look at the settings and see what we can change here. So the first thing we have to do is give it a name. So I chose a really creative name, 2CGW, because that's what it is. And then we're going to give it the public IP. So in this case, this is going to be the public IP of our compute gateway, which we see up here. Remote public IP, if you mouse over it, it helps you out and tells you this is if it's behind a NAT. In most cases, you're not going to use this, but sometimes you're running an IPsec endpoint device behind a NAT, and you're able to do that. It ends up using a different port 4500 UDP, and it negotiates a NAT, and you can tell it what the actual private IP is if you're in that situation. The next part is our remote network. This is the networks that are going to be reachable over this VPN. So in this case, I've selected one of the networks I've configured. Local gateway IP is just for our information. That's what we're going to configure on the other side. That's its public IP. We can see up here. That'll match over here what the public IP of the management gateway is. Local network we can't change. It's hard-coded for us based on the addresses that we've already configured for our management gateway. So we don't have to worry about that.
Just a quick note to jump in there for you, Michael. So this is, we talked about this last week about that management network on the SDDC creation. And this is kind of, again, why it's so important to kind of get it right the first time. Because if you need to change it, what do you need to do?
Well, we're back to last week's show, Matt.
Yep, creating an SDDC again. So that's why we're very, very adamant on thinking this through, and you can see why and how it affects some things now.
Thanks for that. So, yeah, as you see, it's grayed out. So no option to change it. We just need to make sure that it shows us what we need to use when we configure the other side. So the next section, the next few boxes are the parameters of the VPN, and these are the traditional IPsec parameters that we provide access to. There are a couple of others that we cover in our documentation that are non-configurable. Some things such as lifetime of the SA, things, DPD settings, sort of advanced settings that typically the default will work, but we provide those information, the information in the documentation. So encryption, we have three options: AES, AES 256, and AES GCM. I'm using AES GCM because it gives us the highest performance. Typically, you're not running into performance issues, but I always like to push things, so I'm using the highest performance option there. Perfect forward secrecy. Generally, you're going to want to enable this if you can. It just provides anti-replay protection in the future in case your VPN traffic is ever captured. It wouldn't be decodable if somebody eventually steals your private key later on. Diffie-Hellman is just a key selection method, how many rotations it does of the process. Higher is typically considered better, harder to break. Normally, the recommendation is 14 or higher. Since I'm controlling both sides here, I just went ahead and chose the highest level, because why not? Sometimes you need to choose lower numbers in order to be compatible with certain on-premises gateways that you may have. IKE version, there are two versions available of IKE, version 1 or version 2. Most of the time, version 1 is in use. This is actually a relatively new feature for VMC to have V2 supported. So because it's new, I gave it a shot. And same thing with SHA. This is just another parameter that we get. We can choose SHA-1 or SHA-256. So I happen to choose SHA-256. The last entry is your pre-shared key. This is just your secret, which you want to make as complex and random as possible. Always a good idea to use a random password generator to create these if you can. And then just make sure that both sides match. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save here because everything is set up the way I want it to be. And then I'll get the little message telling me it's good. Now, because I disabled it previously, so I can show you what it looks like, I'm just going to go ahead and enable that, and we should watch our VPN come up. So it takes a few seconds. We get our update message, and now, wow, look at that. It's already connected. So my status gives me a little bit of information. I can click on this I button, and it'll give me some details around what's connected. So we have channel status and tunnel status. Channel status is basically your phase 1 in most cases, and your tunnel status will be your phase 2. So sometimes you'll see a partially connected status, and we'll demonstrate that in a second. partially connected means that your phase one negotiation, which is the authentication and key negotiation, came up fine. But phase two, which is where it creates the individual tunnels within the IKE session for each subnet that you've created, means that some of them are not coming up. Usually that indicates you have an IP address mismatch between the two sides. So I'll show you what that looks like just so you can see. We'll go here and actually I'm going to do this on the other side because it's easier to do it that way. So let's go take a look at the other side of that VPN tunnel here. Oops, and this one hasn't updated. Let's refresh it and show it connected. Make sure we're in the right spot. There we go. So here I'm going to go and I'm going to select another network, add it in. Now notice I haven't configured it on the other side. So now I have two networks on one side, but only one on the other side. So this is going to work. We'll see it connected, and look what happens. We get a partially connected yellow. So it means exactly what it says. Our channel status is connected and established. And now we see two tunnels because I added a second network. And we see tunnel status 1 is connected, and that tells me what networks are working there. But this new network that I added is not working. It's saying disconnected. And look, it even gives me a good idea of what the problem is here. Traffic selectors did not match. Check local remote subnet. Well, okay, pretty clear. So don't be afraid to click on these information icons because you can get some good help if you're ever experiencing problems. So I prefer to have all green, so I'm going to remove this, save that, and get it back into the known state. And there we go. So just a couple of notes on our IPsec VPNs. We use what's called a policy-based VPN, which means you define the subnets on each side with a policy as opposed to using route tables. In Cisco world, this is where you apply a crypto map onto an interface and specify an ACL, which defines the networks that you're going to be using. That's currently the only type of VPN we use in VMC. So make sure that your endpoints support that when you're going to set up a VPN. Sometimes you can end up with some confusion with route-based VPNs that use dynamic routing protocols over a GRE tunnel. These are great, but right now we don't support that. Something we should have in the future. Give you more options, but right now you have to focus on policy-based.
Just to clarify that statement, Michael, as opposed to should have is will have. So that's coming in the next version, is it not?
Yes, it's yes. Expected to be out quite soon, actually. So do look for that. Just if you're going to deploy an SDDC today, which would be great, you're going to have to use policy-based VPN only. All right, so that covers it for VPN. I'm just going to give a chance for anyone to ask any questions on the chat, and then we'll move on to the next topic that we want to cover, which Matt, I think, was firewall rules.
Yes, yeah, the firewall rules. Yeah, and like I said, if anybody wants to ask a question, just go ahead and put it into the chat there. You can also tweet at me at VCloudMatt if you didn't want to put something, or sign up for an account on Twitch. That's another option for you as well. And make sure you do add at Classic Technica as well. I'll give him a little bit of a sales pitch because he's doing a heck of a job here explaining this stuff to you guys.
Thanks, Matt. All right. So when we go to add firewall rules, there are two ways that we can add rules. We have what's called a firewall rule accelerator, and then we have the traditional interface that allows you to add individual rules one at a time with your familiar source, destination, service, and action. Typically, you're going to only be creating allow rules because our default policy is always a default deny. There are some cases where you may want to create a deny for a specific subset, but allow a larger subset. You can be creative. Creating firewalls may be more of an art than science at times. But our firewall rules are always based off a default deny all in VMC for both the MGW and CGW, and then you have to allow the traffic that you want through. So we've already got a fair bit of traffic because we've set up a few things to show you in this SDDC, but I can give you an idea of what the firewall rule accelerator is And this is basically designed to help you, where you have to create a bunch of rules for a known service. Instead of creating the 5 different rules or 6 different rules for services that are standard, like HLM or vMotion, what we do is we give you these rule groups. I don't have a lot here because well, sorry, this is just a rule type. So basic use cases. I've already gotten a lot of these set up, so I don't know how it'll respond if I try and duplicate stuff. But let's say, for example, we'll stick with our basic use cases. We tell it what VPN we want to use because we got multiple tunnels. So let's use the new one that we just created or enabled. So that was our 2CGW with my creative naming. And we're going to choose what our remote network is. So, maybe this would be our on-premises network. Let's say our on-premises network uses 192.168.33.0. That's our data center that we want to connect. This gives us an example of, hey, I want all my basic use cases: hybrid link mode, vCenter, migration, contact libraries, and ping. Shows me what it's going to set up, and look, it'll create like 7 rules. All I have to do is click create firewall rules, and it's going to do all the work for me. Saves me a heck of a lot of clicking, which is good because I just got a new mouse and wouldn't want to wear it out too much when it's still new. It's funny. I think we need a laugh track in here, Matt. Like, nobody's laughing.
Yeah, that would definitely have needed a laugh track for that one.
I was laughing in the background.
Yeah, I need like a badoom sound. I think it only apply when you're on though, Michael. So.
Well, anything that can help, right? So that's an example of using our firewall rule accelerator, which is great when you want to come in here and just quickly set up all the standard services. Sometimes you want to customize things. Or, for example, if we're going to come and allow firewall rules to our compute networks, there's no real accelerator in here because these are our applications. So these are dependent on what services we're running. So, for example, if I have a VM that I know I'm running in my SDDC that I want to allow access to do SSH out, because this is my jump box, and I want to make sure it could do SSH. I'm just going to go in here and add a new rule. I'm going to call it SSH out. And then I can come in here and I can select a couple of destinations that are predefined. So I have all internet and VPN, or all my Amazon VPC for the connected VPC, or I can put in my own network. So in this case, I know that my my management VPN is in the 192.168.0 network always, and I want it to be able to go anywhere, but I want it to do SSH. Let's see, do we have SSH in here? Yes, there we do, right at the top, because they know I want to do that. So I can just go click save, and that's as easy as it is, just to add in a rule to allow now any VM in this network is going to be able to go out to the internet and over SSH. So you'll figure out what rules you need for your environment, and you'll create them.
One thing I just wanted to jump in here and add, Michael, as well, is so we've talked about, and Amy, a member of our team last week, did a webinar, or this week actually, did a webinar on connecting AWS services to your VMC instances, which I think is recorded, and you can get access to that by contacting one of us, and we can get that out to you. But one thing to bear in mind is this is only one side of the firewall, right? So just because we're connecting it here also means you have to potentially do it on your side. And for sure, for AWS services, you'll have to go into their security groups and add rules into that one as well to get access to those services. So I just wanted to put that in there as well. As this doesn't have integration yet to create the rules on the AWS side as well.
Yeah, very, very good point, Matt. I guess I should know that not everybody opens up SSH to allow traffic in for everybody. There are some not kind souls out there, so very pointed remarks. Okay, I think that covers more or less how to use firewall rules. You can move the order up and down, which if you're only using allow rules, the order isn't going to really have an impact. But if you're going to be using deny rules for subsets, just to create a subset that should not do it, even though most VMs should be able to do that, then the order is going to, of course, be important. So you can move them around by moving them up or down with these arrows, and of course, edit them if you need to create them in any specific order. All right, Matt, what's the next thing that we want to talk about? Do we have anything else on the network?
So one thing I kind of wanted to bring up as well, and I'm surprised that the question hasn't come up. We have a lot of timid viewers, I guess. But so the DFW, all right. So this is a popular ask. So right now our firewalls are what we would call perimeter slash north south firewalls. The functionality of the DFW is coming soon. So when we talked about the functionality of the route based VPN, all of that will be coming with the DFW at the same time, which should be in the very, very near future. So that's why you haven't seen us doing any of that. If you've seen the NSX demos before of configuring, all those policies in a DFW, it's not available today, but it will be available very shortly.
And just to add a little bit to that, it is very soon. We actually have a sample of it running in our environment. And for those of you who aren't familiar, DFW is the firewall from NSX that allows you to protect your east-west traffic directly on the NIC of every VM. So you could even protect traffic between two VMs on the same network segment, which traditionally wasn't possible with physical firewalls that are operating at layer 3, because you have to route the traffic somewhere for it to get to the firewall. With NSX, you're able to do that directly on the port of every single VM. So it gives you super granular control that we call microsegmenting, and that is what is coming to VMC.
Yeah, I think what we mean is soon, as well as technically, I believe it has been released earlier this week, or was it late last week? I think it was earlier this week. There was an announcement. There's a blog post around it. But you would have to specifically ask for that SDDC. It's kind of more an early access, I would say, at this point, as it is in production, if that is ambiguous enough.
Yes.
Cool. So if there's no other chat questions or anything anybody else wants to see, I think we can move along to the hybrid link mode.
All right. So hybrid link mode, you may have noticed, if you were an astute viewer, that when we did this firewall rule accelerator, one of the options shown in the rules that we created was hybrid link mode. So hybrid link mode is what we use in VMC to allow you to connect your on-premises vCenter with your SDDC. It's sort of like a cloud version of enhanced link mode that you would use within your site to link multiple vCenters under the same SSO. The difference is in VMC, you can't change the SSO domain, and you can't use it on premises. So we had to come up with something new that wasn't quite ELM, but gave you similar functionality. So what we have is called hybrid link mode, and I'll show you how it works. If we go to a new SDDC, what we do is it's under the administration menu, and then we can go down and see under hybrid cloud link domains, and I'll click on that. And this one hasn't been set up, so we get a little box here with all the prerequisites. So of course you need a VPN connection between your on-premises site and your SDDC. You need some sort of connectivity, so that's one of the prerequisites. The connectivity between vCenter in the cloud and vCenter on premises need to be enabled. So the VPN gives you the base connectivity. You need to ensure that the firewall rules are allowed. So we did that on this side with the firewall rule accelerator. As Matt reminded us, we also need to make sure that we've allowed that on the other side. So there's a few ports that need to be covered, which you'll find in the detailed documentation. And the other part that can become a little tricky is DNS. So I don't want to get too much into a discussion on DNS, because you could spend a lot of time discussing that, and there are a few things that we want to get to today. But when you go to your management page here, there's a DNS tab as well under network. And one of the options I want to draw attention to is this vCenter resolution, the FQDN resolution. And in this case, I have it set to private IP, resolvable from VPN. when you're going to be using HLM, you're really going to want to come here and change it from public to private. The difference between those two is whether your vCenter is accessible over the internet or over your VPN. Since you need to have a VPN connection, and I'm assuming that your vCenter and your on-premises site will be not out on the internet. Most people don't do that. You're going to want to set it to private IP
Just to
so that
clarify there, real quick, Michael, I feel like Larry King or something. Oh, I'm dating myself with that one. Um, so there are use cases where you may not want to hook this to a VPN at all, right? So we do have a few customers that are using this as a public cloud exclusive offering, and they get to it via just the FQ, the public I address, and that's that. So not that we necessarily recommend it, but that's I guess I don't not recommend it, but that's a way that you can definitely consume the service as well. You don't need to go through any of this VPN setup or any of those kinds of things if you just want to have a VMC SDDC in the cloud that you can just run with.
yes, absolutely. And just to add to that, the whole purpose of doing this connection between your on-premises and pairing your vCenter in your on-premises data center with your SDDC vCenter, the whole point is to really help you migrate workloads, because in our experience, that's what most customers are looking at doing when they're running VMC, is they're looking at taking some workloads that they already have in their on-premises data center and moving them into the cloud for various reasons. Cost savings, management ease, updating hardware or avoiding updating hardware. There are lots of good reasons to do this, and so we tend to look at things with the eye of a migration view. And in this case, when you're linking it to your on-premise site, you're going to want to use private, but like Matt said, there are definitely other situations where you don't want to do that, and you're going to keep this SDDC completely standalone, and you are able to do that. In fact, that is the default. Um, we can take a look at, well, I won't show you now because I don't want to confuse things, and I don't have that open, but the default comes up as a public IP, and it's the same DNS name, and the DNS servers will be Google's public default DNS servers of 8888 and 8844. Because we're wanting to connect with HLM, we've gone and changed that. So this is an internal DNS server. The important part about this DNS server is we need it to be able to resolve your on-premises PSC or SSO domain. So if it can't resolve that, you're going to run into issues when you try and pair your cloud vCenter with your on-premises vCenter. And that's why I brought you here, to show you that before you do HLM, it's really important that the DNS is set ahead of time. And because DNS changes do have a couple of minutes propagation time, and the entries, if you've already looked them up, they do stay in cache. I think we defaulted only to 5 minutes so that you don't have to wait forever to clear things. But it's best if you come here and do this ahead of time so that you're not stuck getting old entries that need to change. So private IP, so it's accessible over VPN, and point your DNS server to an internal DNS server that's usually over the VPN, but in any case, it has to be able to resolve an IP address for your PSC that will be used in the next section. So once you've got that set up, you're going to come over to this link domain, and there are a couple of spots that you need to configure. In reality, there are 3 sections to doing the link. The first is an identity source. So identity source is where your users and groups are going to be contained. And for most people, this is an Active Directory environment. So you get to choose here when you go to add an identity source. It gives you a whole new screen. And you have these 2 options, Active Directory over LDAP or using Open LDAP. So you set up your Active Directory because that's what we have in our case. You're going to set up your identity source name, which is just a name that you're going to give it. So I'm not going to go through the complete setup here because I'm going to take you to one that I've already got set up, but we'll just explain what each of these is for. And our documentation covers this in more detail. But this is just a name that you want to reference it by. And then you give it the DN for where your users are. You can have it search your base DN if you want to search your whole directory, or if you want to restrict it to a specific OU or a specific folder, you can do that as well. You just give it the full name here. So you put OU equals users if you have it set up that way. CN equals domain, CN equals com, and then the same thing for groups. So your groups may be in the same location, or you may have them in a different OU. It really depends on how you've structured your on-premises domain. Domain name is kind of explanatory. If it's your Active Directory domain, whatever you call that, corp.local, for example, in our case. Domain alias is optional, but that's usually the short name. So in AD, in our case, it's just corp. And then you give it a username. Well, Google didn't guess the right one, but maybe this would be administrator at corp.local, for example. Whatever your password is. And here's a part that I'll just want to point out. You have two options for what you want it to connect to. Now, note that this is an LDAP connection, but it can rely on DNS to look up the domain controllers for your domain. The challenge with doing that is that keep in mind that you have a VPN set up and specific firewall rules. If you select any domain controller in the domain, every single domain controller in your domain has to be accessible to this vCenter. So if you have a small domain and you only have one or two domain controllers, that's probably okay. Yeah, it'll look it up in DNS and save you entering it, and it should be fine. But if you've got a multi-site, you don't want the SDDC querying to one of your branch offices, for example, because it'll just query whatever domain is available, and whatever comes up in DNS is what it will use. So in most cases, you're going to want to specify the server to connect to, and you would give it the URL here it's asking for. So you start with the LDAP and give it whatever the IP is. Tell it what port. So that's typically how you're going to configure that, and that's an important point because you can run into trouble if you have a large environment and you're expecting it to choose the one that you want. It may not. SSL certificates, if you're using LDAP-S, you can import the certificate so that your internal certs are able to be identified. So assuming that you've got all this configured properly, you would click Add, and it would pair it up, and then you would be connected for identity purposes only, which means that you would be able to log into vCenter with a user from your domain. But that's not generally enough, so there's two other steps that I mentioned. There were three. Once you've got the identity source set up, you're going to want to add a group. This group is the group of users from your domain that are going to be allowed access to your vCenter. In fact, granted administrator access in this case, because we're only granting administrator access in this screen for the purposes of doing the configuration. So you would choose a group, whatever. You can create a new group if you want to separate. Cloud admins is something that we often see used as a name, or you could point it to whatever administrators groups you already have that you're going to want to give access to your cloud vCenter. So once you do that, the third step, even though we show it first, is connecting to your platform services controller. And this setup is pretty simple. You give it the FQDN or IP address of your platform services controller. If it's vCenter 6, which it has to be because that's one of the prerequisites, 6.0 update 3 or later, then it's going to be port 443 unless you've customized that. And then you just give it the SSO username and SSO password. So your SSO username, again, not that you would, it's just something I do, is confuse the domain of your Active Directory domain with your SSO domain. So this is the actual SSO that you set up with when you deployed your vSphere environment, whatever that name is. It could be at vSphere.local if you haven't changed it. That's what they give you as the example, and that's the default used by vSphere. So in many cases, it's going to be administrator at vSphere.local. And then you put in your password, and then you click link. And that's really all there is to it. And once you do that, when the link is successful, it's going to give you a message saying you now need to log out and log back in, and it actually kicks you out. And the reason for that is because then you want to log back in with a domain account. And why do you want to do that? Well, because when you log in with a domain account, which I've done here, I've logged in as a corp local account. I come in here and I see here's my link domain, here's my cloud admin groups that I've given access. And I've done something that you probably won't do. I've given domain admins because this is my lab and I was probably testing something. But the nicest thing that you get here, and not obvious because I've got it all expanded, but you'll see in my pane on the left here, I actually now see two vCenters in here. One of them is my cloud vCenter, and one of them is my on-premises vCenter. And that's the single pane of glass that you get through HLM. And the advantage of this is not only that you can see both vCenters and manage your resources from one place, this allows you to do what we're going to look at next, and that's migrate workloads from one site to the other, because now you have a trust relationship that you've created between them. So
just another quick note there. Ask questions if anybody has any questions about the hybrid link mode. So we are looking at on the roadmap of adding a many to one type relationship where you can see more vCenters in this portal. Again, that's something that's still coming and not sure on the time frames. Michael, can you maybe go through and you kind of showed it briefly, but maybe how you would add like the domain user to that cloud admin group and how easy that is to do?
Yeah, let's take a look. So let's see if we can go and add and find another group in our Active Directory here. So we'll go back to, this is actually a different vCenter. This one is linked. So if I go back to my linked domains here, we have an edit admins button. And this allows me to remove them, or let's see if I can, I don't know, what other group. We probably have a default Windows group that we could take a look at. So
probably like domain users or something, which would be even a worse idea than domain admins. But
I was thinking something like schema admins, but sure, both. So we could add schema admins, and this is searching directly in our Active Directory, right? So any Active Directory. So Matt wants to add domain users because he really doesn't ever want to come in here and add somebody again. So we could do that. So let's add it in, and until our security admin comes in and takes a look, we're probably good. So now we have four groups that we've added from our on-premises Active Directory. That any user in any of these groups is going to be able to log into our vCenter in the cloud and manage it. And assuming that their user account also has access to the on-premises vCenter, they will see it here. And that's another little point that I think worth noting is you want to make sure that you're using groups that have access to both vCenters. If you grant access to a group that doesn't have permissions to your vCenter, so if we look at our on-premises vCenter, we'll check out who has permissions to what, and we can probably see some of the groups. So in this case, well, look, we've added our domain admins here too, so we're really bad security-wise. But that's the only group that actually has access to the vCenter on premises. So all the other groups, if they don't have access, like domain users we added in, they don't have access to the on-premises vCenter. So when they come in and try and log into the cloud SDDC, they're going to be allowed to log in and they'll have access to this SDDC. But when they come to the main page, they're only going to see one vCenter because it won't be able to connect to the on-premises vCenter. And in fact, you'll usually get an error message at the top saying it was unable to log into your vCenter and give you the name.
Yeah, consequently, if you look at last week's video, you'll actually see a demonstration of that as that was popped up for the SDDC we had. Can you go back to that other page there, Michael? Because I wanted to kind of show that there are some users that we put into the other SSO domain.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Should be right there, actually.
That was a vCenter. I don't think they show up there. I think we need to look at the users and groups here in the SSO.
So we do put some users into the local SSO, and we would need to do that to facilitate the communication going back and forth. And it's somewhere in here. And again, maybe it's tough to find, but there it is. So it's worth kind of mentioning because as part of the cleanup, if you were to unlink this, you would have to remove the accounts that were created locally as well. We are also coming out with an appliance. I think that's in early access now, or coming soon, that you can deploy the appliance on-prem from downloading it from VMC, and it'll assist in a lot of this setup as well, where it can make things a little easier. So,
Oh, sorry, Matt. I was in the wrong. I was looking at the actual cloud domain
yeah, I
instead
think
of
it's
the
in the
on-premise.
solution users there. Yeah.
But I didn't see it. No, maybe not. Somewhere in here.
Yeah, so it's in our documentation for what what you should look for if you need to actually clean it up, and if you'd probably want to remove those users if you did want to clean it up a little bit.
Right. Anyways, yes. So we do have that covered. Okay. What I wanted to do here. Oops, I'm having a hard time controlling this.
It's that new mouse, I think.
Just not used to it yet.
Ah, did you hear that? I hope so. Anyway,
Okay.
I wanted to set up the Badooms. Also, before, so the next step I think we wanted to go to is actually demonstrating a move. And maybe Michael, you're going to do it, but did you maybe want to show where you would go to stretch the network to kind of make this a live move?
So stretching networks, there are actually two ways to stretch networks in VMC. We provide two different solutions, both with different use cases and pros and cons. One of them is the L2 VPN, which is actually built into the cloud portal. So if we go back to our portal here, you're going to see under the compute gateway L2 VPN. In this case, that's what I've got set up. I have I have a L2 VPN created between our SDDC compute gateway and our lab using an NSX edge that happens to be in our lab. If you don't have NSX in your on-premises data center, well, I first of all recommend that you get it. But if you're closing it down and you don't want to put it in for a short time because you're moving to VMC, which I'll accept, um, then we provide a standalone edge, it's called. And the standalone edge is essentially a scaled down NSX edge that only supports being an L2 VPN client. In other words, you can only use it to connect to a fully licensed NSX environment, which the SDDC happens to be because it runs NSX on the back end to provide all the networking. So when you go here, you can configure an L2 VPN, and this just defines the tunnel. So you'll create a couple of parameters, and this corresponds with the settings on the NSX or the standalone edge side. And really, there's not a lot. You give it the server is what it's listing on. You set the encryption. You create a username and password. Gives you a link to download the standalone edge if you want, and then you'll tell the client side, so either your standalone or your NSX edge, to connect to this server IP, giving it the same username and password, and you create the tunnel. The second part to that is choosing your networks to extend. Um, we can kind of view of what networks are created in this environment in the cloud portal over here, and you'll see that I have a couple of networks that are listed as extended because they have tunnel IDs. So I've got tunnel ID 100 and tunnel ID 25. This is an extended network, which means that if I were to go here, I'm going to have a network that's connected to it. And they don't have to have the same name. They just have, they're linked via that tunnel ID. So in this case, I've linked it to an NSX logical
Yeah,
network.
go to menu. The quickest way is just go to the menu there, and then if you go to menu and then inventory.
All right, let's do that so you can see what we've got here.
Yeah, so we go to the menu and then the global inventory lists, and then at the bottom there is logical networks.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you were looking at the SCDC side, so that's probably a better place to start. I was going to
Oh,
look at
okay,
the
sorry.
on-premises side too, but this this is actually, I wanted to show you this place anyways because this is where you come to add or delete any networks. So the view in the console that we were looking at over here, this just gives you a display of what's there. It just is a reference view because you might want to use these networks when you're configuring VPNs or firewall rules. So it's kind of a handy reference in an overall view, but you can't actually edit. Notice there's no edit or add buttons here. And that's because the place that Matt was asking me to go to here under, if you go to global inventory list and then logical networks, then you see the actual networks, and this is where you configure them. And this actually shows me it's a routed or extended network and the tunnel ID, and it allows me to create new ones or change them between routed and extended when I'm done a migration, for example. So I'm going to look at this CS Lab extended network, that's tunnel ID 25. And when I was looking at our on-premises network, I'm just going to tell you because it's configured in the NSX Edge itself, and it's a few clicks in this environment isn't the fastest environment since it is a lab. But I do have it configured here, and see, I have this one called CS Lab Extended Network, and that is actually linked through an NSX Edge layer 2. So if I look at what VMs are on this network, I'm going to see that I've got a couple of VMs. Oh, no, I don't. Oh, it's only powered off ones. Oh, maybe I got the network wrong here. Fortunately, NSX shows me a lot of information that is not what I'm looking for in the names of the logical wires.
This is also why you should rethink about your naming conventions as well.
Well, that's actually an NSX naming.
Yeah.
It puts your naming way
After.
at the back.
Yeah.
Makes it a little challenging for people who are forgetful like me. So I do have a test VM that we're looking at. Guess I haven't powered it on. Yeah, I think that might be the problem is I migrated it over here for this demo and I never powered it on. So let's instead look at the remote side. So what we're looking at here is a VM that's in the SDDC. So we can show it here. That's in our SDDC. Let's go back to our inventory view. I guess we got our inventory view here. No, it's not the inventory view. All right, so here's this VM. So CentOS source is this VM. I'm looking at the console. This is on the CS Lab extended network. When it's an extended network, note that there's no IP gateway in the SDDC. It relies on the layer 2 VPN back to your on-premises network to get its gateway. So when I go in this VM, and I'll stop this, or try and stop this. All right, let's look at what the network settings are for you network people. So I've got an address of 192.168.10.8, and if I look at what my gateway is, it doesn't ever show you very clearly here because it masks it with a default. It's actually 10.1, and that's what I was pinging before. And if we do this ping again, we'll see that the latency is a little high. It's almost 50 milliseconds. Not terrible, but more than you'd expect to hit your default gateway, right? The reason for that is because that gateway is actually not in the SDDC. That gateway is an NSX Edge in my on-premises environment. And I don't know if we have enough time to show you. I kind of want to show you just so you believe me, but we'll see if it comes up quickly. All right, so if I look at my interfaces on this edge, all right, I will see that I have CS extended network. It's a trunk, and in here I've got my logical switch with 192.168.10.1, and this is tunnel ID 25, which is the one that I've extended. So this is actually the interface that I'm pinging is this one here on this edge, and it's going over the internet, being encrypted and coming back into this side, and that's why I'm able to extend the network and hit my gateway, even though it's on the same network and in a different site. So what we're going to do is just show you how you would migrate that VM. If we were to have time, we would actually see it not lose connectivity. Unfortunately, it tends to take a bit of time with the connection that we have. But you just do it like a regular vMotion. So I take my VM through my console. I'm going to have to do a full migration of storage and compute because, of course, there's no shared storage between your SDDC and your on-premises network. So we need to copy all the data, which is why it takes so long to move them. And since in my SDDC, I'm going to move it to my on-premises data center. And I'll just choose the cluster and let DRS figure out where to put it. Or not. Oh, apparently I've upgraded it too high for our on-premises network. This is another aspect of having older hardware. So let's instead move something the other way. Back.
And just in case anyone was curious, this is live. There's your key. Live demos.
Yeah, you know what they say about live demos.
Now we're willing to take the pain. So, I mean, that's a valid point that Michael made there as well. Is this is we run the latest and greatest versions in our VMware SDDC. So everything you create on that side is going to be up to the latest versions. So it's something to be mindful of when you're looking at this hybrid type use case.
Yeah, and it's another area that the HCX solution is able to help you with.
That's actually a really good segue. HCX is next week's show, where we'll go through some of this, and maybe we'll move that exact VM we just had problems with via HCX. That might be a good demo.
Well, that's excellent. So let's just, before we finish off here, let's start the VM moving. And this is actually a more typical scenario where you'd be moving a VM from your on-premises data center to your SDDC. So that's what I'm doing. You can see my SDDC is my destination. Now, when you move to your SDDC, there are a couple of things you have to consider around the destinations, because there are both management sections and there are workload sections to your SDDC. And as a customer, you only have access to the workload sections or the compute sections. So as you see, there's two resource pools. If I was to choose management resource pool, I'll show you, it tells me I don't have permission. Even though I'm an administrator, I don't have permissions because I'm not a manager of this overall SDDC. I'm an administrator of the compute portion. So I'm going to select the compute resource pool because that's the only one that I have. And I could make pools underneath it, but that was the top level. And you have the same situation with data store. So I have to put my VMs in the workload data store because the vSAN data store is management, and it will give me the same error. I don't have permission. So instead, I'm going to choose workload. All right, and I see it's already defaulting to telling me that I don't have permission. So I'm going to put it in the workload folder where I do have permission. There we go. And now networks. I'm going to go ahead and select that extended network. There we go. It's fine. It gives me my summary view. Now I'll start my migration, and just like any other vCenter migration, I'll see my status come up, and it will start to move the data. And once it starts to move the disk, it starts to slow down, and there's a few gigs worth of data to move here. I think this sounds like the VM is using 65 gigs worth of data, so it's going to take a bit of time to move.
Also something of note as well is this was all free going into the SDDC, so we're not going to pay any kind of network charges for this. Now, going the reverse is not necessarily true.
Right. Any traffic into your cloud environment is typically free. Data coming out, if it goes over the internet, we publish a rate of 5 cents per gig, so it's not very expensive. But if you're doing something that's consuming a lot of bandwidth sending out, then you do want to factor in that amount, because it's not free, and it can add up. But in most cases, it doesn't come up to too big a tally, because the majority of the traffic is typically coming into your environment. Another great way to save on that, Matt, is by keeping your other resources inside of AWS, because we do have that special link that we touched on earlier a bit with your AWS account. You can actually put resources into AWS, EC2 instances or S3, and you can transfer to and from those resources without any additional network cost. Now, you may incur S3 cost if you're downloading from an S3 bucket, but the actual network transfer will not cost you anything in that case. So there are certainly some nice flexible options to allow you to optimize your costs in case you expect that to be rather significant.
And just for some clarification as well, it's not, and this is not me trying to make excuses or anything, but This is not VMware that's charging those egress charges. That is an Amazon charge, which just gets rolled up into the charge that we send out to you. So it's definitely not it's not us. So if you got hate mail, send it to Mr. Jaffe.
So Matt, that's really I think all I had to show today. If there are any questions, we got a couple of minutes, we can take them. Otherwise, I think I'm probably covered everything for now.
Yeah, no, I think that was really good. I appreciate that, Michael. I think that was a very good demo of a lot of the, I don't know if I call it basic, but initial configurations of a lot of the stuff at VMC to start really rolling on things. Like I said, yeah, if you guys feel any questions out there or any feedback, definitely let us know. We'll kind of we want to migrate the reverse direction after. Maybe, David, if this thing will finish, but we'll see. Again, this is because of our network speeds, and again, this might be indicative of what you guys see on prem as well, depending on your network connections and such. So you are moving this, from, in our case, from the Wenatchee to, I believe this is in Oregon, this SDDC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think our big challenge is that we're not the only ones using this connection, and we have a lot of data-hungry developers who are sending transfers over there as well that we're competing with.
So, so like I said, it doesn't look like we're getting any questions. Like I said, feel free, even if you're watching this in a recorded video or anything, to tweet at either me or Michael, and we can add some clarification. Next week, we're going to demonstrate HCX, hybrid cloud extension. And we're going to use that VM that we couldn't migrate this time because of some versions and move those back and forth. So it's just a different migration tool. This is kind of the built-in standard HLM vMotion kind of thing. HCX brings some more features to the game. It does its own spanning technology. It also does some WAN optimization and some replication. I guess deduplication. I don't know if that's the right word, but some replication. Stuff to make sure that you're not replicating quite as much data to potentially assist on those charges we were just talking about. So that's going to be next week. If Michael wants to come back, he can definitely come back and maybe demonstrate that. We might have another guest speaker. Follow the channel if you guys want the updates when we're going live. Check out the events page. I try to put everything in there. It's only update to a week from now, but I'm going to put in there a bunch of other events and go over the schedule that we want to do. We're also looking at doing some stuff live from VMworld this year, so let me know if that's something that's of interest to you guys and kind of what you would like to see around VMworld, and we can definitely try to accommodate that. But if you have no other questions, like I said, this might take some time, so I don't want to kind of keep everybody on the hook watching a bar move. We do that enough in our lives, I think. So I think we can end it here. And like I said before, I really appreciate Michael's time, and I think that was a great demonstration. And hopefully I'll see everybody next week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Matt.